Hello, everybody. Welcome to the launch of He Chose Porn Over Me, edited by Melinda Tankard Reist. This is an extraordinary book, and we're really delighted to be publishing it. My name is Susan Hawthorne. I'm one of two publishers at Spinifex Press. In Australia, when we have events, we acknowledge the Indigenous owners of the land. So I'm just going to do that now. We respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. The countries on which Spinifex offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Eora and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So now what I would like to do is to introduce Bob. Bob is an amazing person. He is the Robert Jensen, I should say, is an amazing man. He is the author of The End of Patriarchy, Radical Feminism for Men. It's the only book that we've published that is authored by a man. And it's a truly fabulous book. And Bob came to Australia in 2016 or 17 as a guest of the Sydney Writers Festival, and did fabulous sessions there and all around Australia. Bob also has been has also been he's an emerita professor at Austin State University in Texas, and he's now retired because that gives him the emeritus. Sorry, I think I said emerita. Now that's nice. It's really a great pleasure to have you here today, Bob, launching Melinda's wonderful, wonderful book, which we've all been reading with a lot of sadness in some ways. So I'm just going to pass over to you and see what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Susan. Thanks to everybody at Spinifex, Susan, Renata, Rachel, Pauline. I did have a wonderful time when I visited. I'm still a bit angry at Susan and Renata because I wanted them to adopt me so I could move to Australia and get citizenship, but they refused to do that. So now I'm stuck in the US. I am speaking to you from northern New Mexico, where I have retired. And it is both a pleasure to be with you all, but there's also some sadness, I think. And I'm going to be real brief in introducing the book by talking about why this book is such a difficult read. And there, for me, are really two reasons. One is I have been involved in the radical feminist analysis of pornography for more than 3 decades now. And that analysis has been around for nearly 50 years, often marked by the publication of the book Pornography, Men Possessing Women, written by Andrea Dworkin, published first in 1979. If you're not, a brief footnote, if you're not familiar with Andrea's work, I recommend it highly. We lost a great thinker and writer when she died in the early 2000s, but her work on this subject is really foundational. If you haven't read her, I always recommend first her 1988 collection, Letters from a War Zone, which is a book that truly changed my life when I first read it. So part of the reason this book we're talking about tonight is so hard is because feminists have offered a compelling critique of pornography, both of the industry, how it's produced, how men use it, for a half a century now. That analysis is more compelling today than it was when Andrea first started writing, yet the dominant culture largely ignores it. And that's why reading the book Melinda edited was so difficult, knowing that there is an incredible analysis we could use to understand these things, and the dominant culture does ignore it. That critique that Andrea and other radical feminists pioneered really looked at three different effects of pornography on women. It looked at how women are used in the production of pornography. It looked at the lives of women against whom pornography is used. And it also looked at the effect of pornography on all women who live in a society where sexual subordination is so normalized through this kind of media. And the book we're talking about tonight really takes a fresh look at one aspect of that second question about how women have pornography used against them. In this case, women in relationships with habitual porn consumers. And that's the second reason this book is so hard to read. I realize this might not sound like a good advertisement for the book because I think everybody should read it, but it's really a book saturated in women's pain. That's important, of course, because that pain is real and we're not going to be able to deal with it if we can't speak of it. The courage of all the women who contributed to this book is really quite amazing. What the book shows is how men's dysfunction, how men's abusive behavior becomes women's problem. Because women who are in relationships with men who use pornography habitual really face a choice that is profoundly unfair. They can demand that the men in their lives live up to a standard of humane behavior. But of course, in doing that, risk losing a relationship. The other choice, of course, is to accept men's inhumanity and risk losing themselves. And I never know when I'm going to get emotional about this stuff. So excuse me, but I think when you add the fears women have about the effects of this on their children, you realize just how scary it is to live in relationship to somebody who is addicted to the use of porn or using porn habitually. And that's the second reason this book is so hard to read, because we have to face up to it. And that's where I really want to conclude on a personal note. I did a lot of research and writing on pornography for the better part of 20 years. And after finishing the work on a previous book called Getting Off, I simply had to stop doing new research and exposing myself to the porn industry. Sorry about the dog in the background. I have continued to speak out about porn, which I've been able to do because of the research of people like Melinda and her colleagues at Collective Shout, who keep going, even though the work is emotionally very devastating. So as I told Melinda, I was both grateful for having a chance to read an early draft of the book and angry for having read an early draft of the book, because there is something about the rawness of these stories, women's honesty about the pain, that really, it just knocked the wind out of me, even though I've been dealing with this subject for so many years. Of course, the upbeat place where I will end is not on the suffering of women, but the incredible resilience of women who fight back, who find a way out, who come together and produce work like this that is going to be, I think, so important to so many. And with that, I'm going to do something professors rarely do, which is be brief and turn it over. So thanks again for being here. I'm really looking forward to tonight.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much, Bob. I would just like to say that it's the middle of the day here in Australia and the middle of the night, or something like 8 o'clock in the US. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce Melinda Tankard Reist, who is the editor of this book and many, many other books, which I will mention. So Melinda is an author, speaker, media commentator, blogger, and advocate for young people. And she's best known for her work addressing sexualization, objectification, harms of pornography, sexual exploitation, trafficking, and violence against women. So she's also the editor or co-editor of 6 previous books, including Getting Real, Challenging the Sexualization of Girls, Big Porn Inc., Exposing the Harms of the Global Pornography Industry, co-edited with Abigail Bray, Prostitution Narratives, Stories of Survival in the Sex Trade, co-edited with Caroline Norma. Melinda is co-founder and movement director of the grassroots campaign movement collective Shout for a world free of sexploitation, exposing corporations, advertisers, marketers who objectify women and sexualize girls to sell products and services. She's also an ambassador for World Vision and a whole lot of other things, and a senior lecturer in the Centre for Culture and Ethics, Notre Dame University, Sydney. So Melinda, over to you.
Thanks so much, Susan. It really is my pleasure to be here with you all today to launch He Chose Porn Over Me into the world. First of all my gratitude to the contributors, 13 of whom have joined us here today, including Serena, Carla, Tash, and Sarah, who will say a few words shortly. It has been my privilege to bring your experiences to light. Thank you for your bravery, vulnerability, and strength. As Robert says in his endorsement, your stories will be a lifeline to other women. And to my publisher, Spinifex Press, whose imprint now appears on 6 of my 7 titles, thank you so much to Renata and Susan, Marilyn, Pauline, Rachel, for believing in this book and for getting it into print in record time. I am so fortunate to have you, this brave, independent, feminist publisher, willing to put my words between covers and send them forth into the world. To Robert Jensen, who I first met at the Sydney Writers' Festival a number of years ago. Robert, I'm so moved by your remarkable support, for endorsing the book, for launching it, your enthusiasm, your passion, your emotion for our cause means so much. And I was deeply affected by your line today that the book was saturated in women's pain. I think that is just the perfect description. So thank you so much. To the other endorsees, Gail Dines, Sheila Jeffries, Paul Laverne, Steve Bidoff, and Anna McGann, what you all wrote blew me away. Caroline Norma's excessive generosity to me has meant so much over so many years. I believe Caroline has dialed in from Japan to be with us today. Caroline co-edited Prostitution Narratives with me, and this book, our new book, has benefited from her insight and wisdom. Sarah McDougall is here today too, from Tennessee. A question in a blog and social media post where she asked, why choose to walk into hell, has been a refrain I've used many times, including to women asking my advice. Why choose to walk into hell? Why choose to marry a compulsive porn user? This is not going to go well for you. Sarah, you came into my life at the right time, and you've been an amazing support and a sounding board through this process. The resource section has significantly benefited from your input. Special thanks also to Tash, whose experience and insight has also benefited the book. I've so appreciated, Tash, you coming back into my life after a number of years, and again, just at the right time. Paul Laverne, I believe, is with us today from Canada. Paul has been unwavering in his support for my work for a number of years. I think he's earned one of those, Facebook top fan badges. He's probably earned a few by now. As a therapist working in this field, Paul has provided invaluable advice. Look out for our Ask the Therapist podcast, which we're launching in the new year. And of course, to my Collective Shout team, Daniel, Caitlin, Renee and Lynn, who are with us today, and Melinda L, who's been on leave. Your love and loyalty sustains me daily. You were there with me every step of the way, and He Chose Porn Over Me is a better book because of your dedication to me and to our cause. To my family and dear friends for upholding me through another book journey. And there's some very special friends on this call today, a couple of whom have been my soulmates for many years. So thank you so much for being here too. He Chose Porn Over Me came to fruition as a result of a Facebook post late last year. A young woman had called off her wedding in the same week that she discovered her fiancé was a habitual porn user. Women commented, "I wish I'd called off my marriage. I wish I'd seen the warning signs. I wish I'd heard the advice. Don't date men who use porn." I shared extracts of accounts they began sending me, resulting in more stories. And in a short time, I had more than enough accounts for this book. In fact, I could probably fill numerous books by now because the stories keep coming. This collection gives us an inside look into the lived experiences of women in relationships with habitual porn-consuming men. It strips away the dominant narrative about porn being not only harmless, but a benefit to relationships and society. The PR spin of the global multi-billion-dollar industry is ripped to shreds in this book. The personal devastation, the brokenness, abandonment, emotional turmoil, and trauma is laid bare. The 25 women in this book were collateral damage in their partner's insatiable greed for porn. Their stories tell of the crushing of intimacy, respect, connection, and love. The women felt inadequate, devalued, not able to compete, and never good enough. Porn colonized their union, their families, and homes, seeped into every aspect of their lives, leaving women rejected and scarred. Porn consumption changed the way their partner acted towards them. "He used me like a blow-up doll," writes Florence, who I think is also with us today. Women told of a total lack of respect for their boundaries, an overblown sense of entitlement, expectations that they would provide sex on demand and participate in sex acts they found degrading and demeaning. The man's gratification triumphed empathy every time. Women described having to replicate the performance of women in the porn industry, with their partners expecting a porn star experience. The women could tell when partners were using porn or having a relapse because the nature of sex changed. Quote, "It was amazing how this behavior changed when he was watching porn compared to when he was not watching it," writes Maggie. It's great to have you with us too, Maggie. "I knew when he had had a lapse before he even told me." It's difficult to refuse sex when in a relationship with a man engulfed in porn. In porn, women are up to it 24/7, and refusal is just another porn genre called forced or violated. Forcing compliance was a standard component of the men's sexual repertoire. Madeline told me, quote, "He would emotionally abuse me for saying no." And Kate writes in our book, "After being forced to perform sexual tasks for his pleasure, I would lie in bed and cry silently." Men asserted their sexual ownership over their partners. Women were subjected to what was essentially sexual terrorism in their own homes. The men, turbocharged by porn, were intoxicated by sexualized power. Some women made the stomach-churning discovery of child sexual exploitation material on their partner's computer. He Chose Porn Over Me situates porn as a significant element in the perpetration of domestic abuse. The men in this book carried out physical, mental, financial, verbal, emotional, and spiritual violence. The porn the men were consuming translated into sexual and emotional abuse and coercive control. Some women described near-death experiences from porn-inspired sex acts, in particular choking, which is a red flag for homicide. A number of women were raped by their partners. One passed out after being choked during sex. Another described being unable to breathe when he put his full weight on her and pressed her face into the pillow. 2 women were pressured into sex shortly after the birth of a child, with one suffering the agony of torn stitches as a result. He Chose Porn Over Me is intended as a warning to young women: don't date men who use porn. To quote Sarah McDougall again, why choose to walk into hell? It's for women drowning in self-blame, the women who think there is something wrong with them for feeling repulsed when men want to act out their violent fantasies on their bodies, and for women who know deep down it's not meant to be like this. It's also a permission-giving book. Women should not have to sacrifice their lives for a man who shows no desire to choose her over porn, who has allowed the erosion of his humanity and become a patron of a global industry built on the bodies of women and girls. You should not be expected to sacrifice the rest of your life to a porn-twisted man who loves his porn more than he loves you. The women who tell their distressing stories are now rebuilding and reclaiming their lives, and they want their experiences to be of help to other women. They have generously offered their advice in the hope that lessons can be learned, that relationships with men hooked up to pornography's misogyny drip system will not lead to happiness and flourishing. I hope this book will help women demand higher standards in relationships, be more discerning, recognize the signs, and turn away from men who consume porn. And that, more broadly, individuals who value intimacy, connection, mutuality, empathy, and compassion, to quote Robert, as I do at the end of the book, quote, the emotions that make stable, decent human communities possible, will endeavour to protect these essential qualities from being devoured by the global porn industry. As now gives me great pleasure to introduce 4 contributors. We have Serena, we have Carly, Tash, and Sarah McDougall. So we'll start with Serena. Thanks, Serena, so much for being willing to be part of our launch, and to all of you for the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. I think Dr. Omar Minwola, a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical sexologist and leader in the sex addiction field, explains things pretty well when he says, having a secret life or world while you're in a relationship or family is and in of itself abuse. In many ways, it's a type of sociopathic behaviour, and what I mean is that it's a selfish worldview where often the welfare of others is not being respected. There is often a lack of remorse or guilt. There's often an externalisation of blame and responsibility, and it's in essence a long-term pattern of degrading and violating the rights of others, particularly family members and your intimate partner. I personally know firsthand the impacts of this abuse. 3 years ago, I discovered that my now ex-partner had a whole secret sexual life that I would never, ever consent to. His porn use had escalated into many sexual betrayals and even sexual assaults. But as we all know, that abuse is not limited to their intimate partner, family members, and friends. That abuse is fast spread among its victims, including those who are trafficked and those who are abused in the industry, and all of those impacted by the objectification of women in our society. Sharing our stories is a powerful act. Janet Mock, an American writer and activist, says, telling our stories first to ourselves and then to one another and the world is a revolutionary act. I decided to share my story as an act of reclaiming my power. Sharing our story connects us with others, even if not through personal experience, but by authentically sharing a part of ourselves with another. It allows us to dig deeper into our own understanding. It gives others permission to also share. It helps us to feel seen, heard, and understood. It helps us to raise awareness and break down social stigmas and misunderstandings. It helps us to build a community of supports that just get it, like no one else does. And most importantly, it leads us to safety and healing. I would like to say a huge thank you to Melinda for allowing me the opportunity to share in her book, He Chose Porn Over Me, and for the mammoth effort she has put into creating this book. It wouldn't have been easy by any means, especially collecting the most intimate, heartbreaking stories of us women, but she did it, and she did so with the most uttermost care and compassion for our experiences. Lastly, I would like to finish with a message for anyone who is questioning their relationship. Please consider the words of Dr. Doug Weiss when he said, "The mirror of a man's heart is his actions." And we all know that a person's actions will tell you everything you need to know about them. Choose a partner with integrity. Integrity is choosing your thoughts and actions based on your values rather than your personal gain. Integrity is what we choose to do when no one is watching. And for those victims, survivors like me, congratulations. We are all so very incredible, and I congratulate every one of you for surviving it. Thank you.
Attempting that. I was just thanking you, Serena, for that beautiful talk, and very, very, very deeply moving. Carla, just go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Melinda, Collective Shout and Spinifex Press for providing a platform for my story to be told. And I wish to acknowledge the other 24 women who bravely shared their experiences for the book also. Sharing my story in this way has been wonderfully healing. I was silent for 8 years as this was happening in my relationship. I didn't tell friends because I wasn't confident I'd get the support I needed in a porn-tolerant world. I also couldn't tell other friends because their partners were friends with mine. I didn't tell my family because I was so ashamed. Paradoxically, I also stayed quiet as I became more of a radical feminist over this time. I knew I couldn't be an authentic or vocal advocate in the porn counterculture as long as I chose to stay in a relationship with a remorseless consumer. So I'm thankful to be here speaking to this and to have you all listening. My experience was still quite raw when I saw Melinda's call out on Facebook for contributions to this book. I was not long separated and starting to get my life back together when I wrote the first draft. The book's postponement was a bit of a blessing. It hurt a lot less to speak about it from a place of forgiveness towards myself as well as my ex-partner. After revisiting memories, rewriting the story and further researching this systemic issue, it dawned on me recently that he was actually a victim too. This is not to detract from the personal responsibility for his choices and behaviour, but I see how we got caught in the rapids of this inverted sexual reality. I no longer see porn as sex sells on steroids, but as a component of mainstream programming that is designed to disconnect and numb us. Porn hijacks healthy sexual agency and pleasure between humans and ultimately our life force. But that's a bigger conversation for another time. I'll read the other women's stories when my book copy arrives. And while there is solidarity in shared experiences, I can't say I'm looking forward to it because I know that mine is not one of the worst. I hope that women who read the book heed our warnings and know they aren't alone if they are living it. And that men will read it too and understand that this isn't benign for anyone. Our stories are a reflection that the shift is happening, along with more recovering men speaking out. However, as Collective Shout and countless other advocates have iterated publicly, conversations and education about consent and true equality can't happen without acknowledging the implications of porn. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carla. And Tash, are you ready to share a few words?
Yeah, I am. Thanks, Melinda. When Melinda asked me to contribute to her book, I knew it was something I wanted to do. I wanted to share my story, so hopefully I could help other women to understand that they are not alone in their pain. I wanted to share my story so that more people would become aware of the harm that porn causes, how it destroys people's self-esteems, relationships, and lives. I wanted people to understand that, yes, it is an individual act, but the negative consequences of it do not just impact the individual. They permeate into relationships, the home, and to wider society. I wanted to write my story, but it was hard. 3 years on from leaving a relationship that had been impacted by porn, I was triggered and re-traumatized as I tried to write down what had happened in my relationship. I pushed through though, because I felt that it was so important for people to understand how it all starts. I don't know how much porn my ex-husband consumed during our marriage, but I do know that his sex education was through porn. My ex had committed to not having sex till he was married, but he had struggled with porn use in his late teens, early 20s. So he learnt about women and sex, not through loving consensual relationships, but through watching porn. He was unrelenting when it came to sex. If I wasn't in the mood, he would push and push until I gave in. He didn't need me to be in the mood or even actively involved. As long as he got off, he didn't care. He would use manipulation, coercion, and emotional abuse rather than love to get me into the bedroom. I remember saying to him on a number of occasions, "Can't you just woo me? I want it to be romantic." He would respond by prodding his erection into me while saying, "Woo, woo." It made me feel completely worthless. Porn gave my ex a warped sense of reality. He expected that I should be available for sex whenever he wanted it. It didn't matter if I was tired, sick, on my period, recovering from surgery, or recovering from having a baby. When he wanted it, he thought I should be available because I just needed to understand that men have needs. And it was these needs, or so-called needs, that led him to pressure me into having sex when I was only 4 weeks post-birth. My stitches had not healed yet and I was still in pain, but I went through with it because he was unrelenting. 4 weeks later, 8 weeks post-birth, I still hadn't healed properly. At the time, I thought I was just doing my duty as a wife and giving my husband what he needed. Now I know that coercion like that, forcing someone to have sex when they're not ready or don't want to, is sexual abuse. My biggest fear, though, is that porn encourages sexual abuse. It glorifies women being harmed. It encourages men to engage in their fantasies and get off no matter the consequences. It gives unrealistic expectations to men and women and teaches them lessons that are completely counter to love, respect, and mutual satisfaction. I wanted to tell my story because I wanted people to understand the lasting impact that porn has. I have battled suicide thoughts, severe depression and anxiety, and I have complex PTSD. Many years on, I feel like I'm healthy again, but I am still triggered quite often, and I have to keep working through my trauma, even though I now know I am safe. I wanted to tell my story because I know the lasting impact porn has on every relationship. My friends and I talk about porn a bit. A lot of them are okay with their partners using it. They say that they understand why guys do it and it doesn't impact them. But it doesn't take long for that story to change. They later open up about how it makes them feel worthless and they wish it wasn't so common. They talk about how they were okay with their husband or partner using it until they observed their partner watching porn of women that do not resemble them in the slightest. And then the body image issues arise and self-doubt creeps in. They open up about how they feel so unwanted when their partners sort themselves out using porn. These are the women who say they are okay with porn, but it is slowly destroying them. As Robert Jensen said, if these women continue to accept men's inhumanity, they risk losing themselves. I know firsthand that these women's future in their relationships is not bright. But I told my story because I wanted women to know that they can have a bright future, but they can't do this while in a relationship with a porn user. So this is my advice. Trust you will be better off and healthier without a porn user in your life. Trust that you are strong and that you deserve better. Trust that you will heal and get your confidence back. You can find happiness again. And if you do the hard work, you can come out of it a better person with a true sense of who you are, your purpose in life, and how you can use your experience for good.
Thank you, Tash, so much. It's just such a gutsy, brave thing to share such an intimate experience. But again, I know what you've been through and what you've shared will help so many other women. And last contributor, Sarah McDougall. Wrap it up for us. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Melinda. I am delighted to be here with all of you tonight because I believe women need to know that we are not alone when we are living in this kind of situation. I believe that this book, He Chose Porn Over Me, is going to help women have a sense of community, a relief that their story is not isolated, and the dubious comfort that their pain is not an anomaly. I was a clergy spouse. I am the mother of 2 autistic children. And for 13 years, I experienced the betrayal trauma in and outside of the home from being married to a sex and porn addict. And then when that life burnt down in a roaring public flame around me, I experienced the homelessness and joblessness and rebuilding from the ashes of a life I thought was supposed to be that happily ever after that we dream about. Melinda found me after an essay of mine called "If You Stay," with that line she has quoted, "Why choose to walk into hell?" That essay went viral on Facebook and other social media. And it was all about warning young women of the excruciating terror, torture, and trauma they are almost guaranteed to face if they marry and then choose to stay with a porn addict. I'm really honored to have that essay published in this book. And I was able to pre-read the manuscript. And I will admit that even after all these years of being out of my journey, years of working with women, years of being a coach, years of being on the other side, it was still a profoundly impactful and moving read. And there were days when I could not sit and read it straight through. I had to put it down. I had to walk away. I had to let the knots untangle in my stomach, because you never leave it fully behind. You may be healed, but you never leave it fully behind. And I believe that when women connect and share our stories, that the journey of healing after betrayal of trauma becomes an overcomable thing, not an insurmountable Mount Everest like it feels when we're alone. And partly because of the type of the slice of population that I tend to work with, I'm thrilled, as counterintuitive as it may be, that He Chose Porn Over Me is coming on the market, because I believe that it is desperately needed as a counterpoint to the many marriage books that encourage men to take their gratification no matter what, and teach women to give it up no matter what, especially, perhaps shockingly, in so many faith communities. The book and the stories are so needed to help women realize that these teachings, whether they're getting these teachings from secular community or faith communities, are teaching them to be groomed to accept sexual assault as variations on a theme of what is supposed to be love. And when women read stories like this and they see themselves in the mirror of this book, suddenly they are no longer healing in isolation, just like Serena said so powerfully a few minutes ago. I love that there is this increasing and growing map to retrace steps backward from the path into hell, if that's where you found yourself. I went through it for more than a decade. And in my particular story, he was the senior pastor of a large faith community, which meant that I had the added challenge of a very public ministry life that kept me silent for far longer than I might have been otherwise. Now, my kids and I are safe, and I work with thousands of women internationally. We have between 6,000 and 7,000 women in our support groups, just the private support groups, providing those private support groups, online courses, clarity coaching, and most recently, a groundbreaking mobile app for trauma mamas who are reclaiming their lives and building a safe haven for their children, even after the trauma of escaping marriage to porn addicts. There is this global community, I like to call it a tidal wave rising of voices that are insisting on safety and healing and change. And I'm so glad to be a little part of this healing wave. So just to wrap it up, thank you to Spinifex Press, to you, Melinda, for this work and for becoming a friend this year, to Collective Shout, for shattering the silence in such a powerful and groundbreaking way. I hope that this book paves the way for intense and lasting culture change and freedom for millions of women and the next generation of little girls and little boys who so desperately need it.
Beautifully said, Sarah. I'll have to hand it back to Renata now before I can't speak anymore. Thanks, Renata.
You can speak forever, Melinda.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Well, what can I say? Thank you so much to everybody who spoke today. There's such important words. And Sarah McDougall, I just wanted to say that, your term betrayal trauma actually was one that we were thinking could maybe even be the name of the book, because it really says it all. It's a trauma and it's betrayal. So to all the contributors who spoke today, and the ones who may be listening, thank you so very much for your incredible courage to write down your story and then, have it out now in this book. First of all, of course, big thank you to Melinda, who came up with the idea. And then, we all know, and Bob said that too in his remarks, how incredibly difficult it is to work with stories like this. And then, of course, with the women who wrote the story, and some of them are still going through these horrible experiences. So it's not just something lovely that, you do at the end of the day and you feel good about it. But I do hope, Melinda, you will feel very, very good about this book. And we can only hope that these thousands of women that Sarah was talking about, really become a force for change. Everybody says, oh, you can't stop the porn industry. They're too big and they earn millions and billions and whatever. But, we never should give up. Maybe it is possible. And with men also like obviously Bob and Daniel, there is hope, I think. Now, books don't just make themselves. There's a team behind it, and Susan and I could not publish any of our books without the Spinifex team. So I'm just going to thank Marilyn Damiano, our office manager, Rachel McDermott, our marketing whiz and computer whiz, I should say, Pauline Hopkins, who also together with Selena Ewing, who is in the States, managed to turn the extraordinarily important resources and the glossary into something that actually could be printed. So thank you to them. And Sharon Murphy, who's the warehouse manager, Daniel Osborne, who now also works with Marilyn. And last but not least, the lovely Caitlin Roper, who is our wonderful social media manager, and of course, also part of Collective Shout. Now, Melinda and Caitlin will be speaking at the Filia conference in the UK from the 22nd to the 24th of October. So if you have any desire to go to England and can do that, please do and watch them there. And of course, Caitlin's own book, Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating, with a focus on woman hating, really, will be launched later, and you'll get a notice about that on the Spinifex Facebook, an incredibly important book as well. Then maybe last, I want to not forget to thank Deb Snipson, who came up with, you can't really see it very well, this very, very beautiful cover, because it's really always difficult to create a cover for a book that has to do with pornography. You don't really want to have a woman's face on it, and yet what she produced is a woman's face, but it's a mixture of pain and strength, and it is a fantastic and very, very beautiful cover. And inside, which some of you haven't seen it yet because they haven't gotten the book yet, Helen Christie, who typeset all our books, has done a great job. So I think that's all my thank yous. Have I thanked Susan for being there and doing all those horrible things behind the scenes, like metadata, and making sure that the book will eventually also be available in the States, Canada, and in the UK. And Europe, it's very unthankful work, but it has to be done, and she does it mostly without complaining. And really just to say again, a big thank you to everybody who has contributed in one way or another to this book, and may it fly. Now, are there any questions from anybody? And if you have questions, maybe Susan, can you take over again?
If you have questions, the easiest way is for you to put up your hand, and you find that in the section under reactions that has a raise hand. Then you come to the front of the queue. So if you do have a question, please do that. In between times, I will just say that the book is currently available for order in Australia from the Spinifex Press website, which is spinifexpress.com.au. If you're overseas, make sure you put the AU on the end. And it will be available in the US and UK from the 6th of September, if all goes well. There's always a little bit of uncertainty about these things, but the 6th of September is the official date for the overseas release. Jennifer, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I'd like to say a sincere thank you to Melinda and to the women today who have shared those stories and the great pain you do feel coming through in those stories. Where can we refer women who have had this experience? Is there a network of support for women? I'm seeing the impacts of this as well in terms of young men who are acting out in school environments as well. And they're not just only acting out in classrooms with female teachers, they're acting out with male teachers who are having to try to manage this as well. So I'd be really curious to know what support networks are there for people, for women, especially who've had these experiences.
Well, there's a shortage of exactly those resources, Jennifer, and lovely to see you here. Jennifer's been a mate for a long time, along with Anna Crone, who's been here as well. Where do they go? Where do you send women? Women are mostly forming their own support groups, and Sarah McDougall has really led the way on providing those safe spaces for women. But in the back of the book, we have a resource section, which does have a variety of publications, Facebook pages, recovery programs, podcasts, support groups, safety plans that women can certainly go to. And one of the reasons we decided, well, a big reason we decided to put the resources together was a lot of women were contacting me and saying, where do I go? You know, where do we go for help? Where do we go for support? Where do we go so we don't feel we're on our own? Because a lot of women did feel this may only happened to them, or was there something wrong with them? But, you know, now they've discovered so many other women going through this. Sarah McDougall, did you want to add to that at all about how women find what you're doing?
Yes, I see Chelsea just dropped in a plug for our wild groups. My organization is called Wilderness to Wild, and we affectionately just call it Wild. But we have women from dozens of countries, and we seek to be internationally accessible. I'm dropping a link to our Wild Betrayed group, which is specifically for betrayed partners. We also have a specific group for trauma mamas, which has some overlap for betrayed partners, but we realize not all betrayed partners have children, and so they don't all fit in just the trauma mamas group. We have a separate group for those who are dealing with raising neurodivergent or children on the spectrum and the extra layers of complexity that creates. We have the Trauma Mamas mobile app, and I'll drop a link for that in the chat as well. And right now we have downloads in 176 countries on that app. We just launched that this year. And we have global resource links for betrayed partners, for domestic violence, and shelters and social services in over 200 international regions. So there's also Betrayal Trauma Recovery, which is btr.org, and that is specifically help with round-the-clock live coaching groups and triage for those who have just discovered disclosures and are going through that initial trauma. It's their specialty. We also link to Dr. Omar Manwala's material. I know he was mentioned by one of the other contributors. He's fantastic and is one of the leading clinical sexologist researchers on the impact of deceptive sexual trauma, both on the addict and on the partner. So I believe, Melinda, we worked together to get a number of those resources in together. And there's several others. We put a bunch of them in the back of the book. So if you're getting the book, I think you will definitely have a good starter pack of resources. And I'll drop some other links directly in the chat just for anyone who wants them immediately.
Anne Leduc has a question about how can we get schools to take up this subject? Melinda, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Daniel Principe and I have been traveling around schools across the country. We're actually booked out between the end of this month and the end of November. So this was the only period of time we could organize to do this launch, which is a wonderful thing, but it also shows the scale of the problem. And if you want to know the scale of the problem, have a look at a blog post on my website, melindatankardereist.com, and also on Collective Shout's website about the rise of sexual harassment in schools, specifically the rise of sexual moaning and groaning by boys, even boys as young as 10, 11, 12, making these sexual noises to female students, to female teachers in the classroom, in the schoolyard, on the school bus, at the school camp, at the weekend party, at the sport event. Without exception, in every school we go to, girls are being exposed to this, subjected to this harassing behaviour. Schools are failing in a duty of care to provide a safe educational environment and also a safe workplace. Female teachers are leaving teaching because of this, that they just hate turning up and being sexually harassed every day. So we've been trying to expose this problem for a long time, but it is definitely getting worse. And so that's why I brought Daniel alongside me to specifically try to reach out to more boys and help them to see how porn is deforming them, socializing and molding them in harmful attitudes and harmful behaviors. And they won't be set up for life. They won't be set up for healthy, respect-based relationships if porn is their primary sex educator. So you can book us. You can go to my website under bookings, melindatankardereist.com bookings, or through Collective Shout and book a speaker page. And we're more than happy to be kept busy because the need is so great. We're also putting together resources for students, resources for teachers, resources for parents as well, to help equip them to help their child, their young person, to navigate a sexed up world and to resist the messages of porn and porn culture.
Wow, I'm amazed you're still standing, Melinda. With so much going on.
She had COVID during all of this too.
Oh, yes. Well, of course.
Well, everyone here energizes me, the support, the love, the dedication to seeing this project through, having be able to, Spinifex saying yes straight away. So everyone here helps me to do this work. It's not a solo effort, and there would be no book without the contributors. So thank you again so much. Thanks for your kind words.
Bob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted, one thing that really struck me tonight, when I first got involved in anti-porn work, 34 years ago, there was the radical feminist critique, and then there was a religious critique that tended to be dominated by men. And I was really struck tonight by how that is a false dichotomy now, that women of faith, secular women, radical feminists, there's a collective work that's really exciting. And it was really great to see tonight. It just came out in several different ways that radical feminists and people who remain in religious communities don't have to be at odds. If both are based in the inherent dignity of all people, including women, there's a lot of crossover. So I was just really struck by that and really excited. So that's it.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Bob. And it's been lovely to have you here today and to hear you speak. Well, I think we've actually come to the end unless somebody else wants to put their hand up quickly. No? Okay. Then we have come to the end. What a shame. We could just go on for hours and hours, I think. Anyway, so the book is available as you'll soon be able to see on your screen. You can order the book with this particular code. If you're ordering through Spinifex Press, HCP20 is the code that you put in next to it. Yeah, please go to our website, check out all the other books as well that we've got coming up. Our next launch will be Caitlin Roper's Sex, Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating, just to keep the fun stuff coming. So we look forward to seeing perhaps some of you back then. If you're in the US, from the 6th of September, you should be able to get a copy of the book over the usual places, either through ipgbook.com or, you know, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, etc. In Europe and the UK, it's available through Gazelle Book Services, and you can see the link there, gazellebookservices.co.uk. That should also be available by the 6th of September, but occasionally there can be some slight delays. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here today. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you at forthcoming launches as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. And Robert.